Hello and welcome to We Never Met, the podcast where I have interesting strangers on every single week. Today we have two interesting strangers, one from Minnesota, one from Oregon currently. Can you guys introduce yourself?
My name is Meyer. I'm an artist from St. Joseph, Minnesota.
And I'm Aremy Stewart, and I live in Portland, Oregon.
And you both are doing a collaborative effort currently, and it's going to be in a gallery in like the next month, I believe, right? Or so. What is your pieces called, and what is this collaboration called that you guys are displaying?
Yeah, we're going to show in a gallery together in November, the first 2 weeks of November in Portland, Oregon's gallery Aftertime. They're a beautiful little white wall gallery. And our work, we're calling it pairings, and we each make a piece based on 3 colors that we choose together. And then we each separately make a piece of artwork that we will show together, ultimately in a show.
So I guess to go off of that and from the beginning, where did you both meet? Where did you come into contact together? How did you start working together?
Aremy and I met when we were 13, when I answered a random classified in the local newspaper to be some random kid's full-time nanny for the summer. And those kids lived right next door to Aremy. So the second day I was there, they said, we want to go swimming. And then they promptly tromped over into Aremy's beach. I said, whoa, wait a minute. They said, no, we always swim here. I said, and I was really uncomfortable. And then, of course, immediately Aremy and her sisters show up. And I was like, I'm so sorry. These kids are using your beach. They're like, no, it's fine. And then we introduced ourselves, and it felt like the sky was opening. And we've been inseparable ever since.
Because you both went to school together, right? You went to college together, too? Is that right? Oh, you did?
Aremy was homeschooled and I went to public school. So we basically spent as much time as we could with each other outside of school. And then I went to the U of M in Morris, and Aremy went to St. Cloud State for undergraduate degrees.
Nice. Were you both sort of a glimpse into your childhood? Were you both creating arts from a young age? Was this something you knew you wanted to pursue, or was this something later on in life you were just more interested in?
We're from a tiny farming town in central Minnesota. And so I think the power of meeting, we both knew that we wanted to be artists really early on. And the power of meeting somebody at age 13 who was on a parallel path in this small town was mind-bogglingly important in my own world. And just to have somebody at that age who was also interested in art and talking about art and maybe making art together. We've been making art ever since we met, which is rare for me.
Yeah.
Adding to that, like Aremy said, I come from pig farmers. And so
sure.
I think that Aremy and her mom were the only what you would call artistic people that I had ever met until I left home to go to college. Aremy's mom expressed her aesthetics through flower gardening, through basket weaving, through all kinds of things. And she just had that artistic sensibility. And so, like Aremy said, meeting people that were of a kind with you, especially when you didn't really know people like that, was huge.
Yeah. So, I mean, you guys have had experience collaborating from the age of 14. So you got a lot of experience together. What did some of the early art pieces that you guys were creating look like?
We made some seriously bad storybooks together. We would write the story together. And Anne is a fantastic drawer. She can do anything, but even back then her drawings were far better than mine. So she would illustrate them. I found one recently. It was terrible, but we made some great books together. And what else did we do, Anne? When we went away to college, we lived in the same small town, but we wrote to each other. We wrote letters to each other.
Oh yeah, we would obsessively decorate the letters and the envelopes.
Yes, they weren't just letters. It was a small enough post office that you would drop the letter off, and they would be like, "You again." They were really
you're
decorated.
The one making those
you're the
things.
one. Yep. And we only lived 3 miles apart, so the letter writing was not necessary, and we saw each other all the time. But
it was completely necessary because they were awesome.
And Anne themed hers. Anne went all through the alphabet. I have 26 letters from her. She picked one letter of the alphabet and just went straight through and decorated the envelope to suit. So
Aremy tried
works of art.
Aremy tried to submit to a theme and lasted a couple of letters and then broke down.
Do you both still have those? Do you still have those tucked away somewhere?
I have all of Anne's.
Yeah.
Oh man, that would be really cool to see. Do you look at them often or no?
Not often, but
No, they're not great either.
they are. If I pull them out, I'm like, oh my God. It makes me so happy. But no, I don't pull them out very often, I suppose.
Sure. Yeah, because Anne, I was looking you up and I almost thought I was trying to make sure that I was looking up the correct person because there's so much. Like you've done so much stuff.
Oh, well, I was going to say there is a woman, I think she's still alive from France, whose name is spelled the same way as mine, I think. But probably what you found is mine.
I think I did, yeah. Because I mean, I was able to sort of link the pottery photos and stuff.
Yeah.
But because I wanted to say, like, you're an incredible, I mean, both are incredible artists overall. Like, the breadth of your projects is insane. I was looking at your website and I'm like, this is all from one person? Am I sure? So
and now this recent project is, I kind of laugh at it because it means a lot to me to sort of feel the freeing aspect of diving into a not completely unfamiliar medium, but the work for this show on my part is constructed out of fabric and thread and yarn with a sewing machine and whatever else, which is kind of about almost an antidote to my clay work. And so to your point, Sam, I do get a little self-conscious in my head imagining people saying, well, what the hell is this? this isn't like your clay work. And what are you doing working in textiles? Who do you think you are? But for me, it adds energy and excitement because problem solving, sometimes not knowing 100% that you're going to be able to pull off what you're imagining and setting out to do is kind of the motivation to say, well, can I do this? Can I realize this?
Was that a constant? Because when you started like down this trajectory as you got older, what was the first sort of medium that you were working in? What were you attracted to initially, and what made you then change to the other ones?
That's a question for me.
Yeah.
I feel like my trajectory has been, how do I say, interesting. I drew and painted on my own with all of my free time my entire childhood. And so by the time I went to school, I guess I had invested quite a lot of hours, primarily you would say in like drawing and painting. When I studied art in college, my undergraduate degree, I felt like I needed to take advantage of the mediums that I had not had access to before and couldn't do on my own. So I focused on ceramics primarily and printmaking secondarily. And then that led into an apprenticeship after school under a master potter. And that experience was, I don't know how many hours, tens of thousands of hours at the wheel in his studio. And so that's kind of where the pottery comes in. Pottery is a massive investment to learn enough control to make pots that are really well made. And so that very serious formative experience has kind of founded my trajectory since, in that it gets hard to leave that behind. And I also don't want to fully leave it behind. I don't think I'll ever be able to stop making pottery with part of my time because of that investment, but also what the medium offers to me. So I feel like my road has been a little here and there and a little jagged and not directed or hyper-focused. But I guess at this point in my life, I'm almost 40. I feel like, you know what? There are different kinds of people. And I really value folks who have varied backgrounds, who are good at synthesizing profound information or content from different areas. That's what gets me excited. And I guess when I get to do or feel like I'm doing that type of thing in my work, I feel proud. And so I'm starting to let go of my hangups about being told my whole life that I'm not focused enough to accomplish enough or be taken seriously. I still feel a little self-conscious about that, but I tell myself, you need to trust in your strengths and your interests. And I do think there's a lot of value in being open-minded, having an interest, a sincere interest in varied disciplines, and trying to make work that bridges gaps.
I mean, I find it hard to believe if people say you don't take things seriously, because the end product is pretty immaculate and amazing. So I don't know how you cannot be serious and do that. Going to you, Aremy, like your abstract paintings are just insane. And also, I feel like I'm talking to two people that I just like really like love their art, but your paintings are amazing. And so I just want to know was that always a trajectory you were going on, like the abstract sort of painting, or were you looking to do other things and just sort of maybe were inspired by certain abstract painters? How did that come about?
Yep. So what I hear you saying, Sam, about Anne's work fits with my experience of her work, where I love showing new people Anne's work. Like I'll tell a printmaker about her work. No, I'm segueing.
Yeah, talk about yourself.
I'm going to. But I love hearing that Sam is blown away by your work, because I show it to other people and they're like, wait, she does everything. And to answer Sam's question about me, I have only ever liked painting. This is a drawing too. But I was homeschooled. I painted all through my young childhood. And then I thought, you need to maybe, watching Anne go through college was nice, because I was like, oh, she's trying all these new things. I'll go to college and I'll try all these new things. I'll try the darkroom. I'll try photography. I'll try printmaking. And I did. I loved it all. And then I just returned to painting after I got my degree. So I was like, oh, you've just always ever been a painter. So I admire what Anne does. But for me, painting is the thing. I just love pushing paint around.
I am a follower of your Instagram and I see the stories that you post, and it definitely is, at least from my perspective, from a viewer, I'm like, wow, like genuinely loves this, like really enjoys it every single day. And you can tell.
We're coming out of a solid year and a half of pandemic, and it is literally the thing. My friends, my family, and art got me through. Yeah.
So doing some research on your paintings and stuff, I found that, you sort of start a lot of different paintings. Like you just sort of like do some like marks, and you're looking for like a true mark is what I read. And can you just tell me a little bit of how the process usually works for you and what you're looking for? And I guess,
Sure.
That sort of idea.
Yeah. Very often I go out into the studio and I have a general idea of what I want to make, like a mood that I want to strike, or a psychological state, a feeling, an emotion. And my process is I lay out a bunch of paper on the floor. I work on the floor very often because I have kids with me in the studio, and they're also working on the floor, and it's just more organic that way. And I just mix paint and I put it down on the paper, a mark. And what I'm looking for is a mark that is untampered with. I'm trying to get out of my own way. And the work that I like to look at feels like it just fell out of the artist in one fell swoop, that the piece just happened, and that they weren't completely in control, but they got really lucky. And those marks are, in my experience, very hard to come by. It's very easy to overwork a piece or make it look too mannered or stilted in some way. And so just finding that mark that came out freely is what excites me and what motivates me to get back in the studio. It's the reason I get out of bed in the morning. What can I make today?
Yeah, because I'm assuming, just talking to other artists too, you talked about sort of getting out of your own way. This is a question for both of you. Did you have issues ever during your artistic journey of like maybe having a block creatively, or not feeling like really inspired to continue to do art? And what got you out of that or got you through that? Was it like a change of mindset or something like that?
I'm going to take this one first because I have an idea. The periods in my life that I've been stuck with art was where I was making art that wasn't the work that I should have been making. So I was making art and I was saying I am an artist, and yet the work that I was producing I either wasn't happy with or didn't. I went through a period in young motherhood where I was doing my darndest to make art, and it was really bad art, and it was representational art, and it was too insular and navel-gazy and wasn't abstract and universal enough. And I was selling this work, but it wasn't the work that I was meant to be making. So when I moved into abstraction, I haven't had artist block since then. I have days where I'm scared of because I don't know what I'm making, because making that shift from representational art into abstraction. I made tons of bad work that people will never see. No, I did. I made terrible work. And that didn't even feel bad because it was at least I could see that I was progressing through the messy ickiness to something else on the other side. And that at least felt productive and unknown and not boring.
Yeah.
What about you, Anne?
Sort of sheepishly, I don't feel like I struggle with artist block a lot. I'm trying to figure out why. I think art has always been the space to step outside of your life and indulge in the ability to make your own choices within a sculpture or a painting, the world within the piece of art that you're working in, which has always felt so precious to me. I guess I struggle with balancing other people's requests to make art for them and commissions and my own work that I make to express my own voice. That's probably what I struggle with more than blockage. I'm too much of a people pleaser. I want to say yes to other people, and I get in trouble where it's too easy to not protect enough space in my own life to realize my own voice. So I feel like, I guess I've always kind of worked primarily as an artist, both in teaching, but also on my own. But a good chunk of that has always been other people's requested commission stuff. So
does it become hard when people request something and it's sort of not cohesive with the vision that you have, I guess, is, you know,
that's what my big challenge is in the middle of my life now, is to say, you know what your work looks like. You know the work that you're supposed to be making. You can't keep accepting favors for people. And I guess it's also about the money, but it's easy enough now to say, you don't need $100 that somebody wants to give you to do a pet portrait. So no offense.
Yeah.
To people who love to do pet portraits, but I'm at the point in my life where I really need to do a better job saying, that's not my thing. I really need to show the world what I have to say. So I have had some really incredible conversations with people trying to commission work just in the last few years, where at first I felt like, oh, here's another instance where you just have to grow the balls to tell them no. But then made a tougher decision to have a difficult conversation with them about what their actual objectives were, and coming from my body of work and my career, what that meant to me to take on their commission that was very educational to them and me, and wound up with a happy ending where I felt like I could make something for them that actually fulfilled their objective, but fit within my voice, and was very proud of the outcome and very happy to include it in, showing other people what I do or my work or who I am. And so I just have to do the hard work of having those difficult conversations and also telling people no politely, I suppose.
I feel like being from, we're all from the Midwest, I guess. And that's just like, I hate confrontation. I just don't like that, especially when it's like emotionally.
And yet you're confronting strangers for your podcast.
Well, hopefully I'm not confronting them. Hopefully we're just like talking. I've tried to get better at that over the years, but I think it's just such a regional thing of like not liking to have those sort of conversations. But Aremy, I was going to ask, do you run into similar situations with your abstract art where you're working with someone on a commission, or do you just sort of create and then people just get what you create?
When I first started making abstract work, it was definitely just whatever came out was then available in the studio for sale. But as I've grown an audience in Portland, people have started in the last 2 years coming to me and saying, I love these colors, and can you make me something that I'm not organically coming out with? That was hard in the beginning because it's a very different process than just going into the studio and making what organically falls out of you. But I love it now. I find each commission helps me grow a little bit because it's the same reason I love residencies. You go away and you get to get out of your own habit. Can be really powerful when you're an artist, and it helps you make work and keep things streamlined. But I think the challenge, especially during a pandemic, is to occasionally bring in something new. And I find that commissions bring in something new ideas, the client might be looking for a new style that pushes me in a different direction and changes how I make art. So I'm always interested. Some of them work out better than others. Some I'm happy to see it end. I'm like, okay, that was great. I'm glad you're happy with that. I wouldn't have made that. But other pieces are really revelation, and I love them. Yeah.
Yeah, you talked about the residencies a little bit, and I saw you got to go to places like Iceland and stuff, which must have been an insanely cool experience. Was there any particular residency or experience that you had? Because, yeah, you've been to Europe, all over the United States with these residencies that have changed your artistic perspective, and I'm sure all of them have elements of that, but is there one particular that you can think of?
Yes, Anne and I did a residency in Tennessee that, to give you an example, we are now having a show based on the work that we came up with at this residency. So yes, these residencies have, for me, real world ramifications. For a good residency, I think it gives you three things. One is just time, especially Anne and I are both young mothers, and to give yourself a week of time without balancing parenting with art making, that's a pretty heady experience, profound. And then also they offer you a chance, again, to just get out of your comfort zone and physically take yourself away. And if you've done travel, we love it for those reasons, right? It gets you out of your routines. And finally, just the ability to, I think a good residency has the element of surprise in that you show up and you are paired with very often other artists in a co-habitational setting, or you have a shared studio. And so naturally your art practice bumps up against theirs, and this cross-pollination of ideas just naturally happens. And so take Tennessee, where Anne and I went this spring. Anne showed up with a bunch of fabric and a sewing machine, and I showed up with a suitcase full of paints, and we were working on individual projects, and then we slowly, over the course of the week, merged the two. And so now what you will see in November at this show is the marriage of these two art practices coming together. And the way we began it was taking 3 fabric swatches, and I would match the colors of those 3 swatches in my paintings, and Anne would make a full textile piece based on those fabrics and maybe an additional couple color pops. But every residency has given me something. If you're an artist and you're thinking that that's something you're interested in, I would highly recommend it. There's so many good ones out there.
Yeah. And you talked about both being young mothers and balancing art. I can imagine doing something like you're deep into like an artistic piece, and then like a kid comes running in and like needs something, or it's just like, doing whatever kids do. So how has having kids affected your art? And I'm sure it has positive effects as well.
I think it's very hard, like adjusting to being a mom or a dad, especially when your kids are really little, under 5, is a difficult transition, just because they have so much energy and they have so many needs. And it's wonderful to be with them. My kids aren't in daycare, but what I've noticed in my practice is just art has always been easy for me to take a deep dive into and like forget to eat for a day or two, and just like, I am drawing this or sculpting, and I don't need food. I don't need anything. And so when I had kids, my oldest is just 4. I was like, man, I can't make these sculptures that take 400 hours a piece, because I can't be in the studio for a big enough chunk of time to work consistently. That those pieces just felt like torture to me. They just made me feel like I wasn't accomplishing anything and I wasn't making work. I saw Aremy and others, but especially Aremy, adjusting perhaps to motherhood by making different work. Someone might say more superficial, but I think that's the wrong way to look at it. I think work where you can be explorative and emotional and pursuing things like color and feeling in an experimental way feels very helpful, gratifying, and pieces that can come together. Like you can do the problem solving aspect of it in like one session of a day, let's say, and then come back and kind of wrap up the piece, is essentially the work that of mine that's being shown in Portland is a shift towards. I feel like it's helpful for me as somebody who can be kind of OCD if they are left to their own devices and maybe overly tight, overly controlling. A lot of times in my work over the past few decades, I've tried to challenge myself to work on things that I don't feel I'm good at, namely being also what Aremy was trying to describe, like this search for the marks that feel free, that feel unlabored over, that don't feel self-conscious, that just kind of emit energy translated to the viewer and feel so alive. And so I don't feel like I'm necessarily good at that, but I feel like as a young mom, setting up my work very differently, it's helpful to me to kind of create a different context for work that fits into my life better in smaller bites. And that's the kind of work that I feel like is especially helpful at this point to pursue.
Yeah, I feel like young motherhood is different than, I have older kids. My kids are 10, 7, and almost 4. And that's a very different thing than having 2 kids under the age of 5. But I do feel like young motherhood was like great training for being a productive artist, because, you know, you would have like 15 minutes when I was raising 2 kids and they were little. You'd have 15 minutes, you know, maybe both of them were taking a nap or something, and that happily aligned. And you could either do the dishes or you could go and like quickly make some art. And I really early on.
Sorry, dishes.
Yeah, sorry, dishes. You're done. You will not get done right now. I don't have time for you. I had to make a rule: no housework. If there was a possibility of making art, that was going to take precedence. And I have a very nice husband who's okay with that. But yeah, it was great training having little kids. And now that they're older, they are either working with me or they're at school or they're entertaining themselves. You know, the oldest can now watch my youngest and be entertaining enough, or read to him, or we get by. I also like to, we've talked about Minnesota or Midwest guilt on this podcast a little bit. And there's definitely a thing that I'm actively fighting against right now, where I flip this script. I could be guilty about how much time I take away from my family. And instead, I am just leaning into the fact that, gosh, to have an artist parent is a cool deal. You know, my kids get to watch me have a business and do what I love to do. And there's got to be value in that. Might not feel like that for them right now, but I had an artist as a mom. And so I never got the messaging of like, art isn't a career, or art is a weird thing to do, or art is not a valid way to spend your life energy. So I was fairly unburdened in that. But yeah, with parenthood comes a lot of like parent guilt. Like there's hundreds of other things I should probably be doing, but I'm going to make art because it makes me really happy and makes me a better mom.
Isn't the phrase, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy?
Oh my gosh. Before prepping for this, looking through Sam's questions, that phrase definitely came to mind.
Yeah, because I grew up in a very different household where both of my parents didn't like their jobs and they were both doing corporate jobs. So I feel like what you're saying is definitely true. It is a good example to set for your kids, no doubt.
I agree. And I tell myself the same thing that Aremy was describing. My parents were very selfless, like to a fault. They lived for their kids. I don't know that even today, like as an adult, I've tried to seek out my mother's sense of self. It's hard. And so one of the few things that I don't explicitly model after my mother's example is I'm trying to do some things, namely as an artist, for myself as an example to my kids, that my entire life is not only about them, because I think it's really helpful. And I think that that's a justice to them. You need to model that for them.
Yeah. I think that's just true. Yeah. With I don't have kids at this point, but or in a relationship too, where you have to be an individual, as well. Like you have to do things by yourself and things that fulfill you. Like you can't just be all about the other person that you're with. That's not healthy either. So I I imagine that's how kids are, just like way harder, way more difficult.
I see a lot of my friends are moms, and you can go down a rabbit hole of being so angry about this situation that you've gotten yourself in. Oh, my kids, they limit me so much.
Right.
But again, if you flip it, I think there is a reason I went into abstract art when I had a 5-year-old, and it was because watching this 5-year-old sit down with a piece of paper and make art was not the way I was making art. He was sitting down and he was so process driven. He was like, what would happen if I now added a huge blob of orange? Whoa, what would happen if I did this? Like, no holds barred, and that was really different to the way that I was controlledly sitting down with my art school mind and being like, this is how we should approach this. And it looked fun the way he was doing it. And so inspired by that, I was like, what if I made abstract art? What if it was terrible? And at the end, I did what he did, which was crumple it up and throw it away. But hey, the process, you do things enough and you learn a lot, even if it's bad and ugly and you don't show it to anybody. So definitely the kids have also been inspiring my own process. So instead of limiting, and saying they're limiting my time, I don't have enough time, seeing it as, gosh, this is so inspiring the way you're doing this. On my better days, I can look at it that way.
I think that's what the process that Aremy and I created in Tennessee together during that residency was also the goal of it is I especially felt like I needed to create a process to be engaged within where I didn't know the end outcome of the piece at the beginning or before I even started. Because having such a deep foundation in art as a kid, I guess, I stopped drawing from my imagination when I was like 4. And I got so good at making art that I had the piece fully realized in my head before I even started it. And then it didn't change at all in the making of it. You can make art that way. I can still make art that way when the project, the piece, or the idea seems to suit it. However, for me, it promotes so much important growth for me to be engaged in a process where I am problem solving in real time, responding to colors, materials, and form, composition, and the process, and where I can make changes and have to make changes to resolve the piece, where then the outcome becomes such a delight because it wasn't foreseen. And it feels harder won and more rewarding somehow and just delightful.
You both went to school for art. Is there I've seen this with actors or like heard about this with actors sometimes where they go to school for acting and then they have to like unlearn all of that when they actually go and become actors because it's like what they learned is so rigid and specific and like going to Juilliard and then like having to act in like a movie, they have to like unlearn what they learned or something. Did you find that school was a good thing for you looking back, or did it make things more rigid and more like sort of what you're talking about where you have to follow these certain paths to get to this end point and you have to follow these rules or something? What was your experience with going to school for art?
I'm not sure that my experience at art school was hyper similar to maybe the stereotype that you're imagining. I don't know. I went to a small college in rural Western Minnesota that had a great art program, but they are not known for their art program. And so the few faculty members there, I think, they could be self-important, but in the scheme of the national scene, they weren't teaching art at a college that anybody would necessarily go to study art. I don't know that they had all that big of heads. So I went to the U of M in Morris. If you described the department as a whole, you might say that they had an orientation towards craft. There was an emphasis and a priority placed on asking students to do the hard work of learning to use the techniques and the materials well. We didn't have to grind all of our own inks, but like in printmaking, we had to do some prints where we had to grind our own inks. So it's a little old school, but there was that fascination and valuation of sort of the craft side of things. making art that was well made and that skill, emphasis on skill. And then the conceptual side was pushed, but we were in the middle of nowhere in a town of like 2,000 people in farmland in Western Minnesota. And so the student body brought together a range of backgrounds, and I don't know that any of it was hyper philosophical for 20-year-olds. So it was kind of like nurtured, but I don't know. It was like, I don't know. So I think it was a good foundation. They would say, we need to give you the beginnings of skills so that later in your life, when you have something worthwhile to say, you can say it with skill so other people may look at your work or listen. And I guess that was their approach.
Okay, sure.
I feel like talking about my going to art school has to be couched in saying I came from a very different educational system. I was homeschooled right up until 12th grade. Like I didn't go to school, which was great for me. It allowed me to spend tons of time doing things that I knew I loved, which was lovely. And then I went to college because of situational things. My husband was also going to this college, and I knew we were going to be in this town for 4 years, and I was curious, having not done much formal schooling before. But this is not a college that people go to if they want to be artists with a capital A. They had an art program, and I learned a lot. I will say that I truly believe that some tenets of homeschooling, unschooling, like you should talk to a lot of people who do the thing that you want to do, maybe even outside of a college experience. That holds true. Like the people that I was really inspired by were maybe not people coming to me and saying, I am a teacher. I just love what I'm doing. You know, these are people who have a career and have a real passion. And those people were really great to hang out with, you know, and sometimes you can learn things in a roundabout way. I also got a great art education by just living in Europe for 3 years. We got lucky and spent 3 years when my kids were little living in the Netherlands. And, you know, if you're based there, you see a lot of old art. And in art school, you are shown art, but it's on a screen, and there's a reason we go to museums, because you have a visceral understanding of art. So I feel like I got really lucky. I got college, I got living in Europe and seeing really great art solidly. We would travel, and I was just traveling to see the art. And that was a fantastic education. So there's lots of ways to come to learning about art, I feel like. And now living in this town, I've chosen to live in a town full of artists, and I'm slowly post-pandemic trying to bring more artists into my world and, you know, kind of in a way create my own home residency. Just, you know, you form a scene, and those people, all of the good things in my life right now are coming to me through art and through other artists. There's a power there in forming your own crew.
Yeah.
So that wasn't your question, Sam. Sorry.
No, I was just curious. I just wanted to hear about your experience there, because I talked to an artist in Chicago named Liz Flores, who's an amazing artist. But we were talking about how sort of the opposite of what you're talking about, how when I grew up, it felt like if you wanted to be an artist or make money off of art, like you had to be dead. Like all the artists that had made money are dead now, and now you have to go do something else. You know, it was never like solidified by my parents or by like the school system that I went that it was even possible. So when I went to college, it was like, I'm not gonna do art because I don't even think you can. Like, I don't even think it's like a real thing that you could live off of. And so I'm glad people had different experiences than that, because that's not a great way to grow up in that regard.
I don't know. I think that was our experience growing up. I totally agree with you, Sam. I was so like, well, there aren't artists. And the ones whose paintings show up here and there, they're all dead, and no one cared about their work until they did die.
Right, yeah.
Like going through, I went through public school, and so I was told, oh, you like art? That's cool. So you can choose. You can be a high school art teacher, or you can be one of these new computer artists doing graphic design. And they were like, choose, because those are your only two choices if you're going to work in art. So I went to college thinking, oh, I guess I'm becoming a high school art teacher.
Yeah, Yeah, because we're all from the Midwest. There was no like, at least around my public school, there wasn't any art shows or galleries or like things like that where you could like go see, someone alive doing it and like showing off their work. So yeah, it just seems so like, oh, the time has passed for this. Like I had to have grown up in like the Renaissance or something, or wherever to be an artist and to live off of that. But I think that hopefully that perception is slowly changing even in the public school system. I don't know. I'm not in the public school system anymore, but I hope it is. I hope it's changing.
I think it's changing. I mean, the tiny town that Aremy and I grew up in, it is so weird because there's a handful of other people who are really committed, who are my age in their 40s, who are full-time artists. One of them's a potter and one of them's a printmaker. And they're just incredibly awesome people, just, going at it full bore. But so now we thought of it as a farming community. Now in the area is known as, St. Joe, that's where the artists live. Why is St. Joe full of artists? And that's such an artsy town. And like they organized art crawls and they organize stuff like that. And so now it has this reputation. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is so weird. Because when I was a kid, if you would have told me that I was going to still be living in St. Joseph as an adult, I would have said impossible. No way in hell is that possible. Because I liked art. I thought that there was no place for me in central Minnesota because I liked art.
Aremy, what drew you to, or when did you come out to Portland or Oregon in general?
My family was my husband had a job working in the Netherlands, and we were ready to dip back into American culture for a while, and we moved here based on the art scene, and he got a job here, and the ability to take my kids out into green space, which was fairly limited in the part of Europe we were living in. We chose this kind of arbitrarily, and we were just going to be here for 2 years, but this city has won my heart. I think this is a great place to be. It's a nice size. I don't have any family here, and so I feel like, part of Anne and my relationship, which keeps me super grounded, is her being still based in our hometown, and I kind of get to live vicariously through her.
Vice versa.
Yeah,
Aremy is the cosmopolitan, globe-trotting adventurous, and I am the farm girl with a huge family who has crazy deep roots. And so I feel better. I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't have to travel the world constantly and live in a giant city with an actual art scene because Aramy's doing it for me.
And I feel the same way. I don't have to renovate my family's barn and hand build my own house, which we haven't even talked about Anne doing.
Yeah.
But I can go places and live places. But Anne and my friendship with Anne keeps me grounded. We're like when you grow a new apple tree and you take root stock and you add a new tree on the top and you see what happens. I feel like Anne and I are cutting.
So Aramy's surprisingly fast trajectory into abstract art a couple years ago was so insanely fun, rewarding, inspiring for me to watch unfold from Minnesota. I've watched her make art most of my entire life, and I know I'm still scared to death of abstract art. And when people do it successfully and it inspires and it feels alive, I know how hard that is, even though so many people poo-poo it and just don't understand at all what it takes. So to watch Aremy make that leap so bravely and then just progress since then so quickly, and it's just so exciting to watch. So as an example of, and now it pushes me to say, okay, Anne, you need to be that brave in your work. And how can you really, really challenge yourself to make the work that you admire, but you don't feel like your present work embodies those feelings or that sense? How do you possibly push yourself to get there? And the residency was a good tool, like Aremy said, pulling yourself out of your daily life and creating space and freedom. But talking about like having such a intimate relationship with someone who is like you but different than you means you get to kind of benefit from their growth. You kind of take on their growth as your own, or at least as a challenge to yourself.
Yeah, because Aremy, what was that like? Because you talked about going from more realistic paintings to like abstract art. Was that a scary thing for you to do emotionally?
Oh man, that was scary as hell. I can't
Yeah.
believe I did it, really. And it happened, as Anne said, really fast. I went to a residency up in Washington, and I had brought work that I knew what I wanted to do, and I progressed through that really rapidly. And then I got to the point where I was like, oh, you've run out of the work that you knew you wanted to make, and now you have a couple days left. Maybe you should try something new. And in the back of my mind, I think growth progression is slow. Anne and I saw a show. Anne came to visit me when we were living in the Netherlands, and we took a tour through cities in Europe.
A road trip
with my kids. She sat in the back of this car with my kids, and we took a road trip, and we took in all this art. And one of the shows that we saw was this amazing Cy Twombly show, which it was so fun to see with Anne, because this was a pivotal moment in my art viewing, where Cy Twombly was doing things with paint that up until that point I hated. I did not have a good relationship with abstract art until fairly late in my life, and yet that show, seeing that work, I was like, there's an entry point here, and I can see, like, deep inside me, something is alive. It comes alive when I look at this work. There's something here. But then, you keep going with your life, and it came back out at this residency, and I was like, what if you kind of are interested in abstract art? When you go to a museum, this is the wing you go to. You're not going to the realism anymore. You're really, there's something here. But again, like, when you switch what you do in your work, you lose your audience. People have been telling you, hopefully, you're good at this thing, and they're here for you. And then you switch what you do, and you confuse everybody, including yourself. And it opens you up to all these little existential crisis points. And so it was terrible. I went through a year where I just made terrible art that nobody wanted to look at. And that felt bad. But I don't know. It's just trusting the process. And if getting older, I think you're always trying to find that boundary of what you know how to do, and then push it. Take that and just push it a little further. And sometimes that happens fast, and sometimes it's a slow baby stepping into it. But Anne has always been super good at being like, I'm going to go for the thing that I don't know how to do and just see what happens. And you need those people to handhold, because strangely, making art is very scary still to me. I have a lot of resistance to starting a new piece. You walk into a studio and there's a big blank canvas, and there's a pretty high probability that you'll ruin it if you start something, which is fine. I've chosen something that, you don't like it, you paint over it, and you don't have to show it to anybody. But yeah, changing what you do when you have a pattern of, how to work, shaking that up, it can be really, there's a lot of resistance there.
I don't know if it's my nature. It's probably that I had mentors who had modeled that for me, and the importance of having mentors in your life. When I was studying in the pottery studio under my teacher after college, there were visiting artists that came through the studio to make a body of work briefly. And one of them was an 82-year-old woman from the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, who she had spent her entire life working as primarily a printmaker and a drawer. But she saw some clay work that came out of sculptural work that had been made in my teacher's studio. And she just pounded on his door and begged him to let her make some work there. So she started trying to build these. Initially, they were helmets out of clay as sculptures, but she's a very inspirational person and has remained an important mentor of mine. But that experience, especially seeing her and her telling me, because she's a very emphatic person, she'd say, Anne, I don't think you understand. Do you have any idea how scary it is to start a brand new medium at the age of 82. She's like, you don't understand how brave I am. I'm like, oh yeah, sure. Okay, whatever. But now that I'm a little bit older, I don't know. I think that I challenge myself to do things that I'm unsure of because of people like that in my life.
I have done improv in the past, and there was an 82-year-old lady in one of my improv classes at some point, and it was like she had trouble getting up like on the stage, but she was still doing it, and I was like, "This is amazing!" Like that you're even just here and like and trying something that you never tried before. But yeah, so I wanted to talk. Aremy sort of alluded to it, but Anne, do you still live on that farm that you renovated?
Yeah,
and you got clay from like the ground and like made your own clay for pottery and stuff?
Yep. So there again, the credit goes to one of my teachers, the teacher that I apprenticed under. His name is Richard Bresnahan. He studied in Japan in the 70s. He set up a studio at St. John's University and Monastery outside of St. Joseph, Minnesota in the early 80s. And he moved billions of tons of clay to St. John's from a local road construction site, and has been making pottery out of it ever since. There are people sprinkled around the country who work with what they call wild clays or local clays. But I mean, people have obviously done this for all of human history. They've dug clay on the surface of the earth and then made it workable. So it's a process of cleaning or screening out things like excess sand, twigs, vegetable matter, etc. And then sometimes the clay is blended with a small amount of other things, either to raise the firing temperature, because any clay that you find in a random location is going to have its own unique characteristics, its own color, its own texture, its own firing range. I do amend my clay with a little bit of a higher temperature ball clay and a little bit of feldspar, and then make pottery and sculpture out of it.
Wow. And you also, do you live in a house that you built? Is that currently?
Yes.
Okay. How long did that take?
Oh man, I was pregnant at the time, and so I like whipped it out in a year, and I almost killed myself.
Oh my God.
I don't want to do it again. I was plastering my whole damn house like a month before I gave birth, and it took like 7 weeks. And by the end of plastering, I like couldn't move my head on my neck, and I was just. It's kind of like the end of youth, because I was about 37 at the time, 38 at the time. And it was the first time in my life where I think I had pushed my body to accomplish a task in my head where my body like almost didn't get there. And I was in danger of like permanently damaging myself.
Oh my God.
Which I don't know, because before that I had done some crazy things and my body always just sort of somehow went along for the ride and it was okay. and now I'm like, oh man, I don't want to do this ever again. I mean, my two little kids take plenty out of me now. And so I'm like, I've worked my ass off and I deserve to just I just want to make art and do some teaching and keep my kids alive. And that's enough. Like, don't ask me to do more.
For sure.
But now I have a place to live, I guess. So
trade-offs of pushing your body to the brink. At least you have a place to live, I guess.
I mean, I don't know. Like, it's kind of interesting because artists are always seen as these abnormal people. And as a young person who wanted to be an artist, things like, how would I ever have a retirement fund? Or how would I ever own my own home? Scared the hell out of me. I was like, how am I ever going to have a home? No one will give me a mortgage. I'll never have a home. And so at this point, I don't know, it's kind of weird to look at my life and say, you've managed to do some of these things that are expected as a normal adult, like own your own home. But the way you've done it is not the way that people are told how it's done in like a roundabout, not illegal, but like, I guess, alternative way.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of interesting. I don't really appreciate when people tell other people that you have to do these things and there's only one way to do them.
It's because it's the way they did it.
Yeah.
Usually. I want to wrap up here and say, once again, I think the art that both of you create is amazing. And I've been so excited to chat with you. But can you also reiterate when the gallery show is happening, where people can find out more information, and also like personally where people can follow both of you as well?
Yep. So Anne and I are having a show at Aftertime Gallery. It's the first 2 weeks of November. And if you live in Portland, even if you live in Seattle, you should come and see this show. We are so excited to share this work with you. And Anne is going to be in town for 2 weeks, and we're going to be doing some artist talks and a gallery opening. So definitely, if you follow Anne on Instagram, or if you follow me, I'm at Aremy Art on Instagram. I'll be nonstop talking about this show because I'm so jazzed about it.
My Instagram handle is Anne Meyer Ceramics. And we each have a website as well. Mine is just myname.com, and with an E, MEYER.com. Aramy's, yours is aramystewart.com.
Yep.
What is your website? Yes?
Yes, so, that's my website.
AREMY Stewart, STEWART.com. And you can see a bunch of more of our work there.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate both your times. Everyone listening should go follow you both, because the art, as we've talked about for the past hour, is amazing that you're creating, and they can continue to follow the journey that both of you are on. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, thanks for your interest and your time, Sam.